What is up, everybody? Welcome to Omnic Lab episode 200. Woo! We made it. 4 years of the lab.
We're still here.
We're still here. Can't get rid of us that easy. Sorry. This is an Overwatch podcast. In case you've missed it, we are Omnic Lab. We talk about strategy in the game of Overwatch. We've been doing this for about 4 years now. Feels good, man. My name is Rob. Joining me, as always, is the Georgia Peach himself on a nice Saturday evening. Andres Gomez, what's up, dude?
What's up? Yeah, I can't believe we made it to episode 200. It does seem like we started the podcast a long time ago, and that's because we did. It's been what, like 4 years at this point?
Yeah.
But it's been a fantastic journey. The people that we've met along the journey has been amazing, and one of the people that has been parallel to that journey is joining us today. Couldn't be a more fitting personality, the Death Blow. What's up, my dude?
What's going on, guys?
Hey, welcome back.
Appreciate it. Been a while since Halloween, our yearly Halloween crossover.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm definitely super glad to be back and really happy for you guys. I know we hit our 200 a little while ago, and we were patiently waiting for you guys to get there as well. But yeah, really happy for you guys. Been a fan of the show since you guys started. I don't know, shortly after I met iPlay, to be honest with you, and we started playing on that team together. But even that feels like, I don't know, you guys say 4 years. In my head, it's been like 5 or 6. But I think that's just because I'm an old man and time is relative.
It might be 5 at this point. I don't know.
I mean, it's been 4 for our show's launch, but we've probably known you guys since the launch release of the game release was 5 years. Like, they had made the announcement that Overwatch was a thing 5 years ago, and then the game's closed beta was 4.
Okay, so I'm right when I say 5 because we predated launch because we cheat and we just cover esports, so we were able to do that before we could even play the game. Okay. So that makes the dates line up a bit.
Yep. Well, this week we're just having a good old time. We're doing a double header. For those of you that for sure missed it and that are here for the live show, we had our previous episode 189 with Patrick Beja of the Instance and the Overwatchers, who also started in around the same time as us and also the launch in the 5-year bracket, but is no longer a thing. They ended up deciding to close their show. However, it was a great show with Patrick. We went through kind of back in time in history. We're going to do something similar this with Deathblow. We're going to be talking about metas and evolving competitive strats. We're also going to be talking about Overwatch League's kind of evolution. We're going to be talking about all kinds of fun stuff there. But it's good to have
my day like 400 times today.
Yeah, well, we don't have Blevin, so we're going to get it like about half the time, which is nice.
Yeah, I think it's going to be exciting. I think last episode we got to reminisce on Overwatch from a release standpoint and a lore perspective. Patrick had amazing insight, him being a previous employee at Blizzard and kind of how everything looked back then. So really cool episode for that. But today we figure we're going to be one of the most passionate esports Overwatch guys that we've met, to reminisce on the more competitive side of the game, some of the metas that we've seen through the years, Overwatch League when it launched, and some of the progression we've seen with players and styles and everything revolving maybe, the players that have taught us how to play Overwatch better.
And just as another reminder, we had finished our mid-month game night for this month, but the next one should be the following weekend. On Friday the 31st, we're going to be doing our big end of the month game night, the normal one, the one that the big shebang, the, I guess, episode 200 celebration game night, if you will. So try to make it out for that one. It'll be a blast. We're still doing our coaching sessions at 250. We got some information with some of our Diamond patrons that are doing some donating of their coaching sessions, which is great. But for now, they're sticking to a personal friend of theirs. So if you're interested in that is at the plat level or the $2.50 kind of joining thing on our patreon.com/OmnicLab. You can sign up for that if you want to get some coaching. We have the Maestro Sigma event is drawing to a close in the next 2 or 3 days from the recording of this show. So hope you got your stuff in and you got your crazy Beethoven skin For Sigma, we may or may not be referencing a patch that's going live or has gone live on the PTR talking about Moira and Genji changes, but that's not going to be a focus today. So we'll be trying to cover that in the following week. So we do acknowledge that that is out there in the ether space right now, but I'm going to talk through.
Gasoline to set my hair on fire, so I don't know how much I can really participate in that convo.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, let's kind of start from the beginning here. So we have a very long, extensive document that I want to credit the user for doing. It is user/5camps on the competitive Overwatch subreddit, who has been doing this for 3 years. And the first couple iterations of this document, if you find the older versions, are still with the same start, the same content in it, just further down the line as more time has elapsed. He just adds on to this document. And what it will do is it will give us a timestamp for when heroes launch, a month-by-month look, and main supports, flex supports, main tanks, off tanks, hit scans, flex damage, major buffs and nerfs, what season of comp they're in, some major tournaments, some smaller tournaments, and then what the meta name was for that given time period. So we've got a lot of info in this small little document that is just a JPEG, but it's very interesting to look at, seeing how long some of the metas were. Like, you guys remember people were complaining about Dive lasting too long, and then we had Moth meta, and then Moth meta lasted too long, and then we had Goats. Those are the kind of the big 3 triple threat, but there was a lot more. So we're going to be talking through some of this. You want to start with a little kind of a flyby, guys? Like, what's some of the stuff that really popped out to you when you took a look here, as far as either tournaments or metas or something like that?
Yeah, I've actually got a little bit of a like pre this chart meta that I can remember back from. There was like 2 phases to the closed beta. They like shut down around Christmas time of that launch year, and then came back and brought some more people in and things like that. And it looks to me like this picks up after it comes back, right? Say in February. So that to me is like beta 2, and I can distinctly remember that was when I started playing, so it's kind of like the perfect chart for me. But obviously we were covering the Gosu Gamers Overwatch weeklies and everything like that with the 200 other people that were watching Overwatch esports at the time. And you know, there was like we called it the Fantastic Four meta, and it was just Reinhardt, Lucio, and then Pharah Mercy was in every single composition that ever got played. There was no variation off of that, those particular heroes. And then, you know, you'd get some fill and some, you know, mixing with your off tank and your other DPS spot. But yeah, I think that was one that we regularly reference on High Noon Podcast, and just talk about that. It's kind of our throwback to each other, to just to remind ourselves of simpler times. But yeah, so that one I think was a lot of fun, and really kind of, you know, people make a lot of jokes about like Overwatch Classic and stuff like that, but that's what that would be to me. If we were to like go back to truly the infancy of the game, you know, it would feature those 4 characters all the time.
Yeah, I remember when starting to play the game, I wasn't paying too much attention to like tournaments or anything. Like, I was really just enthralled with learning the game. And when I got access to the closed beta, sort of around the same time as UDB, because I remember we ended up meeting around that time, because you were starting a team and you wanted to kind of like take it a little more seriously. I was like, oh yeah, this is a great chance. I was putting a ton of time into different heroes, but the one thing I do remember was eventually realizing that Zenyatta's orb would always stay on people around that time. And eventually that became a thing. You would just always take Zenyatta, and the Zenyatta would always put his orb on somebody, either a Pharah or a Genji or a Winston or whatever that would be. And that orb would never leave the person. It didn't matter if he went to the other side of the map, lost line of sight. It's all good. As long as the Zenyatta didn't move it, it was all good. And I do remember getting into some matches where like the Genji was just literally unkillable. You just couldn't kill it with the permanent orb.
There was
those times.
back in those
Yeah,
days,
that was crazy.
there was Zenji comps. Symmetra was different and provided shields to all of her teammates. So you would just literally play. For a while it was like Zen and Sim were your supports because Sim was a support back in those days.
I remember that. Yeah.
And then it evolved to double Zenyatta, double Genji, and we just called it Zenji. And then typically that was because no hero limits, like the number of just groundbreaking rules changes that have occurred and like hero reworks and stuff that have occurred since that time is kind of crazy. But that turned into Twinston, Tucio, and Trey Trey, which
Oh,
was a double Winston, double
I
Lucio, double
hated
Tracer.
that. There was some
Once they fixed
variations of
York.
that too. It was
Mhm.
like that one used to be the one that became kind of like the standard. But I remember people would also do it with like double Zarya, double. The thing that always stayed was the double Lucio and the tracers because they were so mobile. But man, I remember being on the receiving the end of that for the first time when people were just starting to like figure like what even Overwatch was. Like I remember those games, everyone was just like running around crazy, doing just crazy
You were
stuff. And then one game randomly we played against a team that just came out of the gate, double Zarya, double Lucio, double Tracer, and they were just like zoomed into us, killed everyone, like a pretty much like a death ball, yeah. And just finished the map in like record time, and we were like, "What the hell just happened here?"
A lot of fun. I mean, talking about this is bringing other things to mind, and this is another one that's not on the spreadsheet because it wasn't really a meta, but yet every single map ended with 6 divas on your team if you lost, right? Because you were just going in to stall the point, and you just rotate your 6 diva players. Go, okay, my mech died, get ready to go, and then okay, the pilot diva dies, next diva in. So you would just constantly flood divas over and over again to just bleed time off the clock before you
That
lost.
was the most
Um,
uninteresting part of every Overwatch game was right before the things capped. You're like, okay, well, we got the Diva Fiesta for the next 5 minutes.
and the only time that changed was on King of the Hill, and it would just be 6 tracers, right? Because it was
Yep.
always a significant run back, so you really
Yeah.
needed the speed, and you could jump over gaps or pits or barriers or what have you with the dash to make it on time. But
Hmm.
so much just pure insanity came out of no hero limits, and it's funny to look back. I almost want to go listen to some of our episodes because I did not want hero limit. I was like, no, it's not like it didn't make sense to me. Like it was just wasn't. I mean, I've already mentioned how old I am previously, so I'm just like in that old man mentality where I just don't want it to change. Like whatever, it's just like no. This I fell in love with this game. I want it to stay this way, and really funny looking back on it because man, it was
I
just
think
absolutely the right call.
I think in retrospect, yeah, I think this is the way that should have been done. Absolutely. If the game had launched with hero limits, I think we wouldn't have had a chance to like really know what was kind of like some of the craziness out there, right? The fact that it didn't launch with limits and you can do whatever you wanted really gave it free reign for people to just experiment with the game and just like realize, okay, what is even a meta? Do you really need 222, right? Because that was the consensus before it seemed like right. Sometimes even maybe 3 DPS and maybe 1 tank, 2 healers, but there was also always a consensus that 222 was a pretty balanced composition, right? Even from the beginning, we had the 2 tracers, 2 Lucios, 2 Winstons. People were already thinking in those terms, but
Logically it makes sense, right? 6 characters on a team. There's three different roles essentially, right? Support,
yeah,
damage, tank. It just divides so well. The math works, so why wouldn't it work for
yeah,
for
exactly.
strategy?
But it did give the players kind of like the possibility to just try out some like really crazy stuff. And at the same time, the developers to see like, okay, what is too crazy, right? Like 6 divas stalling the last point on Hanamura. That looks a little crazy, you know? So, but it allowed the community and the developers to sort of like start honing in on those things. So I personally like that it was released with no limits. And then later on, once everyone had a chance to had their hands on it, we were like, okay, or all right, guys, let's put some order into this. Here limits.
Yeah, and
A little
the
salty
interesting
we didn't
thing
get
about
single double.
the 222 is that August 19 is the magic number. That's when 222 is like established with Sigma. It took us that long in the game for them to like put something like that in place where it's a hard restriction, because we've been playing this game for a long time and we have never had that. Like, you could still run as many tanks and supports and DPS that you wanted for almost the entire life cycle of the game. Like, the part of the game that we've had with 222 roll lock has been less than a full year.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
that's
true.
unbelievable to think about, but it's true. Like, we until November we'll have, sorry, until August it will be the full year of this 222 roll lock for the general player base.
After stage 3 of Overwatch League, so stage 4 I think was played under that. So yeah, about that time, even just looking at the Overwatch League calendar, it lines up. So yeah, it feels like so long, but it really just hasn't been that long since
It
then.
hasn't.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Also, the thing about the 222 with sorry, the thing about the no hero limits that I think finally converted the team over rather than like the diversity thing was that it really gave credence to a lot of hero identities. Not, because like if you remove all of this extra stuff and you see more of the same heroes, you're essentially seeing less of all of the heroes and seeing more of specific ones that are just powerful together. So I think from the team's point of view, they wanted to showcase more of their work. They wanted to make sure that people were getting like more of their identity within the hero roster. There's more heroes being played in a given match that are unique. Different styles of
Well,
play kind of can be reflected. So it's really interesting from multiple standpoints, not just the competitive balance, I think.
yeah, yeah. And I think more than that, I think that they were hesitant to change the feel of the game because whether it worked or it was the right direction for it, it did change the way that you approach Overwatch and the feel for it. Just recently, they've added the no limit queues, and I just for curiosity went and played a few games. And immediately after I clicked the play button and no role appeared, it just like queued me straight into it. And then in less than 2 minutes, I was in a match. It reminded me like how it felt in like the old days where like you were not a tank or a DPS or a support. You were just like an Overwatch player thrown into a game. And then you would kind of like take it from there. Sure, some people would like gravitate to certain roles, but it's not like you were like hard locked into it. And some people would call themselves like tank players or support players, but it never felt like that going into a game, right? You were just an Overwatch kind of player. But now it's very delineated, which has its goods and bads, but it did change the feel of the game and like how you approach it and sort of like your identity within the game, I feel.
Curious, did you get the full experience? Did you get the no healer solo Roadhog tank game? Like, was it exactly
Oh
like
yeah.
old school?
Oh yeah. It was complete
True to
chaos.
form.
But the other side was complete chaos too, which honestly, when it's complete chaos versus complete chaos, it's almost like you can interact that way too.
There's a lot of fun in that, and to give it credit where it's due, it gave you a lot of ability as an individual to impact your game more in the sense that when you had got into that instance, right, where there was just people locking DPS, and you say, okay, well, I'm a balanced, versatile player. I can pick up tank this time, and now your team is the one that has, you know, the shield main tank, and so you're really well off. The big problem with it was when that wasn't enough, right? When it was literally like 6 people locked DPS, and you were one of them. You weren't any different than all the rest of them, you know, trying to get that Genji right away. But you were willing to switch, but it was still like just you, and the other team would have 2 people. So there's way too many games were impacted in the hero select screen, and decided in the hero select screen, I
Oh,
should say.
for sure.
But it really did, you know, we talk about it a lot, and it's very easy to, and I think, the Reddit and Twitter conversations talk about it like it's more of a meme, but there was, some positives to that, right? Where it really did open up an opportunity for you as an individual to make a big impact by being a team player and being selfless and being willing to make that swap. You're able to do good things. But I also am a little bit different, and it's part of why I didn't like the idea of hero limits and things like that, and why I was resistant, because I've only ever six stacked this game. I don't log in with a duo and play Overwatch, right? Like I'm very much that person that took it to heart when they said this is a team game meant for teams of six versus teams of six, when they were making it and announcing it and launching it. And I really have always stuck to that. And you mentioned, I was forming a team that was in beta, was my first team. Like, I remember on Overwatch launch day, the game dropped at, what was it, like 6 p.m. my time or something like that. I had a scrim scheduled for 7 o'clock. Like, I was already into it. I was going, like, I was, hit the ground running. I didn't make that scrim because 2 minutes after Overwatch launched, it forced an update to Windows 10 on my PC, and I just had to sit there and watch Twitch streams on my phone while Windows updated. It was a rough launch day, a launch event for me personally. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy, the different lens of how different people approach and play the game, and how that all these different decisions and rules and format changes that they've made have impacted everybody across different things. Because for me, the game's not crazy different if I'm six stacking in a team environment, because we've enforced those roles on ourselves. I was a Lucio when I started. I was a Lucio main. Then I became a flex support, and I was a Zenyatta main, and so I've always kind of had those roles, and I've never had to worry about really doing that balancing, because I did that when I picked my teams, when we met people in our discords. It's looking for an off tank, right? It's not like, I mean, it became less that over time, but as we've gotten more flexible. But that was really kind of how we started, and how I've always played Overwatch, is like in that defined team role. Whether the game did it for us or not, we were doing it. We were playing in like an optimal comp kind of a situation. And I think that really changes the conversation a lot.
Oh yeah, for sure. When you are in a control group where, like, you can trust your teammates and they're willing to work together, having that freedom of no hero limits was actually kind of nice. Again, it
led
did
to a lot of
present
creativity and fun. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. It, like you said, it did have a lot of problems, like the six divas kind of thing happening, and that had some annoying things. But at the same time, it also led to a lot of really cool matches. Talking about forming discords and forming teams around that time, we had been playing in a team together. We played in it for a couple of months, and then Omnic Lab sort of started, the Discord started, and then High Noon had started, and both podcasts kind of started to picking up traction and communities. And I remember at one point, each of us sort of had like developed like a team in each of our communities, and it started becoming
Specifics of it, but I do really remember this. Yeah.
it started becoming kind of like a little rivalry, like a friendly rivalry, basically. We would find each other on the ladder every once in a while. And I remember this was around the Beyblade meta, kind of like when Anna had recently come
when we
out.
figured out that Anna wasn't terrible.
Yeah. It was cool because a lot of the players that started playing with us back then still play today, and some of them have become like amazing players. Like Shockmaster comes to mind. He started as like, I have no idea how to play this game. He was like listening to Omnic Lab. He was like playing different heroes, and he was learning alongside us. But you look at him now, and he's playing kind of like collegiate Overwatch with a scholarship. Yeah, it's too good.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. I mean, the two communities for this show, we've always had really strong, well-backed communities. Our Discord servers are some of my favorite places to go to discuss Overwatch. I'm not a Reddit guy. I'm not a Twitter guy. I'm very much so a Discord guy, and yeah,
Mm.
it's always been a lot of fun to have that crossover. And I mean, I remember I didn't know you were a podcaster when we met too, so it was really
Just small world,
almost like
honestly.
fated. Yeah, it just felt like
Yeah.
fated that me and you were, you know, that the three of us, four of us, really counting Blevins, were just gonna be friends and gonna get along. You know, we were playing for a couple weeks before you're like, yeah, man, I got a show too, and I'm like, oh crap, I didn't know.
Well, we can't
I
be friends
remember
anymore.
that.
See ya.
Right, competitor, get on the other team. I gotta you know. But yeah, you know, it's great, and I do remember it was so long ago, but I do remember some of that rivalry between the two communities and how fun it was, and how excited I'd get when I saw, you know, I play games on the other team on the ladder. And it's a little disappointing. You don't want, like, you're taking SR from your friends, but at the same time, if I can beat you, you don't deserve that SR. I'm
Oh, it
sorry.
was.
That's how it goes. I want it.
I remember.
I remember when I was invited a couple times, very few times, because my work schedule was very different than yours.
I
So
was
we
gonna
got
say,
a
well,
chance
your
to finally
time schedule
play.
wasn't the thing at the time.
Yeah, well, we I wasn't as good at all when we first started, for sure, and I was significantly worse than you guys. So we got into ranked, and there was somebody that you said showed up late to scrims, and so like we were playing and just doing drills on the ladder or whatever, and like we saw that other guy on the enemy team, and he's like, "All right, boys, it's time to farm some SR. Let's go." They were showed up late for skim. They're gonna lose their rank. Let's go. It was, oh man, it's just the trash talk early was just so much of an enjoyable thing. And Totem is on the chat today, and he's like, "Yeah, I never played with you guys, but I enjoyed stirring the pot. It was fun."
I remember we would be playing ladder and be kind of like messing around, and eventually would like get matched randomly against Deathblow's team because it would be around the same SR. And as soon as I saw that name, like Deathblow, was like, all right. I guess I gotta straighten up in my chair. I gotta stretch a little bit,
You're
bring
right.
a little oxygen in,
My
you know.
keyboard in the right position. Okay, great. Let's go.
It's like by the end of the game, the keyboard steadily gets more and more vertical, like from turning it.
Yeah, like,
Oh man.
by the end of the game, I'm like intently staring at the screen. We were like, well, those are some cool games. And we actually had a lot of listeners that would write to us in those days saying like, I love this like rivalry that you guys have, because a lot of them would listen to your show and would listen to our show independently. They didn't even realize that we knew each other sometimes.
Mhm.
And then when we kind of like started kind of like trash talking a little bit, but again, it was a friendly rivalry. So if we would win again against you guys, we would definitely mention it on the show. If you guys would win a game against us, you'd definitely
We're
bring it
like,
up.
okay, well, we gotta somehow find him in ranked before next week. That's like our goal.
Yeah, you don't want to be losing. You know, you want to report if you lose the first one. We got to find him again. I don't want to. I don't want to be
Yeah,
reporting.
we're not gonna end on this.
1-0 loss. Yeah, it's got to be 1-1. You can't. Gotta find him again. Where's that?
I'm
play?
pretty sure that there were days that we got matched several times
There was
in
for
like
sure.
in like the same night.
Yeah. And that was,
good
I mean, we're
times.
talking so long ago, the ranked system worked differently, right? Like,
Yeah.
you go look at my career profile, and like my SR season 1, what was it, like 67 or something like that? Like that number
Yeah.
now doesn't make any sense. But I think the way it worked back then really led to, getting in that, not really a rut. I mean, in our situation, it wasn't a rut because we got so much extracurricular enjoyment out of it, but
Mhm.
where you
Yeah, it
just
was like a
really
scrim.
constantly
That was like a scrim
see
with
the same
SR.
people. I mean, back in those days, I used to queue into Jeff Kaplan. No joke. Tiggly. It was his name, at least at the time, and multiple occasions that it was 1 week. I think I played against him 3 times, and it was. I do a little bit miss that aspect of the ranking system
Playing
now,
against the devs.
the way it works. I mean, the devs. I played what could have very possibly been the first ranked game of competitive Overwatch. I may have been in it depending on how the timing worked. Like, they dropped it, we pressed play, and it was my team and I play. I don't remember if you were on that beta team. My instinct is no, right? I think you were around when I was a flex support, not when I was a Lucio bot. But
Same thing.
But this was, I went against Cloud9. And if you remember old school esports teams, this was like Reaver on Widowmaker Cloud9. And
This
when
was
they
the
dropped
Cloud9 that invented C9.
Yeah, very probably the original C9 roster, or the original C9 team played
Yeah.
by these guys. But let me tell you, they knew where the point was in our game, and we got crushed. And I remember it so vividly because nobody knew how ranked worked, and we get in, and it was on, I want to say it was not Ilios, it was Li Jiang or Nepal, one of the two. I want to say
Hmm.
Nepal. And the second map ended, and we were 2-0'd, boomed, and everybody's GG, 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 and then it's like round 3, and we're like, what? Like, 'cause
Excuse me?
it was 3 out of 5. Nobody had any idea. I remember Kai was in that lobby. It was like Reaver. I want to say Grego. Like, it was just so many of the
Bunch of old school
OG
names. Yeah.
Overwatch esports guys, and yeah, it was a lot of fun, and that's one thing I definitely miss about that beta experience with Overwatch, with interacting with those people that you'd know and you'd watch, because the
Yeah.
community was so much smaller at the time. But yeah, it was definitely great and a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I was gonna say, moving up in the meta tree, like right after that happened, I remember there's a nerf to Nano Boost, where it no longer grants you a speed increase. Right before you would get a speed increase, damage increase, defense increase, and no
it's like a
healing
fire
though.
rate increase or something.
And maybe yeah, and a fire rate increase, but you would get no healing from it. So you would really have to
Right.
target somebody who was like full health. If you target somebody who was like about to die, ooh, that was a very risky nano, unless you think you could top him off like really fast after that. But Sombra comes out around that time as well, but is regarded as a terrible hero. She was such a new concept around that time, and I think people were expecting her to be sort of an assassin or like a tracer-ish sort of character. But
Hmm.
when she comes out, is almost underwhelming, right? Like, oh, you can't kill anything with Sombra; it takes forever. People didn't know how to use hack effectively or who to hack. They didn't even realize like EMP is amazing against certain characters with shield. So it takes a while for Sombra to like really come into play. Around that time, instead, people start opting for triple tank and Soldier 76. Not knowing Soldier 76 was the play. And guys like, how am I blanking out on Dallas Fuel's Prodigal Son, dude? Um, Soldier guy, you know this Deathblow?
AKM
AKM.
or
It
Harry
was
Hook.
no AKM. That was like his days, dude. Like
Yeah.
he would dominate.
Yeah, it's funny thinking of the entire arc Sombra's had as a character in Overwatch. Like you said, she came out, nobody really knew how it worked. What we did know was that if I hacked a health pack and my tank stood on it, I would get my EMP every single fight. It's that still wasn't good enough for Sombra to see regular play. She was held to exclusively played by the flex support player for a while there, and it was
Which is
only done on
weird.
2 CP maps. Um,
Sometimes she would get played as the second support, actually. Oh, is that what you're saying? Like, yeah, the
Yeah,
flex
yeah, flex
support.
support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I was then, and then I remember like on Volskaya, it was I'm switching to Sombra, and I need to like learn all my translocator spots and all that stuff. And I loved it because I was a Zen, like I was being forced to one trick a hero, and I switched to my role because I didn't want to one trick a hero anymore. I didn't want to be a Lucio bot, and that was all that you could really do as the main support back in those days. So I switched, and then I was like, "Oh nope, you're one tricking Zen," and I was like, "Well, at least it's different." But then this happened, like this hero came out, and now I get to play this DPS character in the middle of my scrim block, and it was just a blast. I remember learning that I could put my sprays on the. Okay, so think of Volskaya point one. You're on defense. There's that middle hut room with the baby pack in it.
Hmm.
The room I'm talking about. If you go to the other side of it, you could put your sprays on the glass there. I'm guessing this probably still works. And it would block people from being able to look through the glass, but you didn't see the sprays looking out. So I remember getting my whole team to go out there so that I could live in that room and I could hang out in there. And if we sprayed it, nobody would see me in there, but I'd be able to see them coming out. And I had my EMP every fight. So it was just translocate, pop in, hit it. So yeah, I mean, Sombra was a crazy hero that's had, I mean, a full rework, everything like that. But yeah, the ways to play that hero in particular were crazy. And yeah, speaking of this time in particular, this was Ninjas in Pajamas debuting Triple Tank and really shaking things up. And this was, I want to
So it's like
say,
the Roadhog oppression
yeah,
era.
the one of the first times Roadhog was like meta and playable because there was no halt around to make the hooks that much more reliable.
Mhm.
Though it was Hook 1.0 back then, so they were pretty reliable no
Could
matter
hook
what
people
happened.
Oh
from
yeah.
behind, like dimensions back then.
Through walls and all sorts of stuff. I remember getting like people would do the thing where they throw the hook and then jump off a cliff when they're about to die and like try to rip one of your tanks off the board with them when they were dying because that line of sight
Mhm.
wouldn't stop it. It would just
Oh,
Yep.
dude,
pull
the
us with
hook
you,
was
stuff
my
like that.
number one enemy. I think if you go back to some
Still
of the
is.
episodes recorded back there, I would just talk so much trash about the hook. I hated it.
I still
Um,
don't like that hero.
talking about that though, that era ends pretty soon after that when Hook 2.0 gets released and people sort of start deviating outside of Roadhog. And around this time, it's also the time when tracers start becoming like really good. Like the people who have been trained playing tracer for a minute is like, oh man, that practice is starting to pay off. And I think at this point we've already seen like some pretty amazing things. Like I think Shadowburn already has made a name for himself playing some like amazing Genji. You have guys like Sinatra kind of like starting to poke their head out in kind of like the competitive scene. Not yet so much in kind of like the pro scene, but um
Bring up your Shadowburn skin in game for your San Francisco
well,
Shock
not quite
Shadowburn
yet.
skin.
This hasn't happened,
This
so
is
we're not
before
bringing.
Overwatch League.
Yeah, we're not bringing up that yet. Timeline, please. Chronological order. Um, but when people talk about the dive times or when dive became a thing, this is around this time. I think Miro is starting to like come out with some amazing plays on Winston, which solidify Winston also as like the tank to be playing, combined with people already playing Tracer like Madman. Awesome Genji's already coming into the scene. Zenyatta still being super powerful with his orbs. I think it just kind of like led to the golden times of Dive. And Dive actually stays there for quite a bit. And I think that was the problem, or that was almost like what killed Dive in the first place. No other meta had lasted for this long up until this time.
Right.
And it was a meta that seemed really hard to counter, right? Like when you were going up against these like really good Genji Tracer players, as a Zenyatta, you just felt defenseless. It felt like super terrible. And I think this is when people started saying, guys, we need something that can counter this. But what do you guys think of the dive times? Did you enjoy it too much?
You know, personally, I've loved every meta that they've thrown at us. My issue with the metas is always how long I'm forced to live in them. This was actually our time as teammates here, Andres. I'm fairly certain was around that Sombra on flex support time, and
Mm-hmm.
going into dive was definitely we learned to
Mhm.
do this together. And back then as the Zen player, it was a lot of that. I was on my own. The entire extent of my peeling that I received was my Lucio, and he would initiate by running off to help the tanks. It was just, do I live long enough for him to be able to come back and help me was really the situation. And
Yep.
even on that role that was the most frustrating in that thing, I loved it. I really honestly, it was great. It was just a matter of how long it lasted. I was very ready to move on by the end of it, as I have been with every meta we're going to talk about going forward, basically from that dive. I really, you know, I wish I was a main tank player then, if I'm being honest, just because I've not gotten my heyday on Winston since I've moved into main tank. It's really not happened, and it's always felt like the hero that I took to the most in the entire game, despite being a Lucio and Zenyatta one tricks for the entire first 2 years or whatever of the game, or year of the game, whatever it was. So yeah, I was, I do look back on that fondly. It's a beautiful chaos in dive, right? It's not just everybody hit the same target at the same time, although that might have been the extent of our strategy and execution. And in that time, it's about pincering and coming from multiple locations in different directions to really create havoc in the enemy backline and force them to, oh, I've got the Winston over here and the Tracers over here, and I can't shoot them both, and I'm stuck and I die before I really decide who I want to be going after. So getting to watch that at times and esports play was great. I think it might have been some of the best spectating that we've been able to do. It was the easiest to follow because it was just very aggressive. It was five people are jumping away from your Zenyatta onto the other team's Zenyatta, who kills Zen first and then move in and try to get the other people. So yeah, I mean, I do look back on that fondly. My only issue, like I said, with that one and all of them is just how long they lasted.
For sure. It's
I know
worth
that
mentioning that Orisa was out. Like, it came out right before this meta. And it's probably the hero that had the least impact on arrival. Like, non-existent, pretty much impact. People played her and they were like, nah. No, this is it. This isn't it. Dive. Dive is what is it.
Yeah, she didn't really get played at all until they had buffed how fast she could regenerate her shield and then the health on each individual shield. Those are like the two big factors. The pull was always strong, and that's where a lot of the players were saying that that's what she would be played for, and still is true. But like, her spread was also bigger on her gun, so it was way less accurate. I think the missile speed might have even been slower, just from memory. But her head hitbox was gigantic and still is, but like, her cooldowns didn't really align the way they do today. You couldn't really weave shields with how fast they would get ripped with your fortify, and then you couldn't really like halt in good coordination with weaving your other abilities very well, and she was just super immobile. And so that's why dive still stayed in play despite having new tank options for them. And I know for me, when I was playing dive, I really liked playing in that era because that's when I first started playing seriously a bit more damage, and started picking up Tracer and started kind of mastering more roles, or trying to. And then I started gravitating towards Anna, and I think this is about the time when I finally hit plat for the first time. So I kind of started getting a little bit more depth in the game, and I really enjoyed seeing Zenyatta's just pop off in competitive play, because there was a lot of mind games with dives and setups with when Zenyatta's were able to farm their ultimates, because they would pretty much use the dive to get some of their ult with the Harmony Orb, and then wait for the enemy team to dive them just so they could do a 4 or 5 headshot dink on their volleys, and then instantly get their ults to just join their team. Because I think that was also when they gave Zen that big speed burst, because he was super slow when he used Transcendence. That's something that we haven't really discussed about this particular meta, but he was real slow back then for a while before they buffed that.
Yeah, no Zoom-Yata at the time.
Yeah.
Definitely strange. Yeah, I mean, talking about a little bit about like the Orisa launch, that was a very weird release for that hero. I'm not sure they've ever put out such an undertuned weak hero on its release
On launch. Yeah.
That's really kind of opposite of what I would assume is like generally good practice for hero design and hero release. Is you release something overtuned that makes people want to play it, gets people using the new hero, and then you scale it back and bring it back a bit. And we've had plenty of heroes where that wasn't the case, but a lot of the times that was just the misconception of the community about them. Like, people didn't understand how to play them, and I low-key think we're still in that for Wrecking Ball. We're still in that world for Ball. But
they mentioned that right after Orisa, Doomfist came out, and same thing happened with him. He got some play because he was overtuned for that time. People just didn't realize how to actually play him. So he ends up falling off of the meta momentarily because people just didn't have like those rollouts or those crazy things. But unlike Orisa, he did see a little bit of mixing in that dive meta when he came out, because he could just one-shot Genji, Tracer, all these other heroes that were like super hard to kill. Doomfist was good, right?
And he had sustainability. That was the big thing.
I think all the top tier players with fighting game experience were the ones to figure him out.
Yeah.
And get him mastered. But yeah,
Right.
he released definitely the opposite, like massively way overtuned, but just has such a high skill cap, even to the point of like, to be relevant in the game, you need to be very good at his movement and his
Yep.
his abilities and his kit.
Mm.
But on release, when you had even that base level of understanding, good night, nothing else mattered. Like your DPS were already dead. You can't Zarya bubble them. You can't heal them. They're just gone. It was crazy. Thankfully, my SR, I didn't have to worry about those Doomfist.
They weren't that good.
If
Yeah.
any that existed didn't last very long. They were gone in 2 days and just
Yep.
flew up
Yeah.
the ranks.
Yeah. Just a quick, brief segue here outside of our normal discussion. We've got some pop and chat today, so big ups to Dowley for giving us 1,100 bits. So thank you so much for Dowley's joining up and doing that, as well as Tonka Truck popping in and giving us 100 bits. Really appreciate seeing all of you guys in there, and seeing some old friends with Mars doing a Twitch sub, and Shazir and Meet the Ben and Totem. What else we got in here? We got Anna in there. So it's really cool to see all of you guys kind of popping in here for chat. Just a brief note. I'm not sure for the live show if we have everything prepped for some of the kind of last minute things that hit the email, but you can bet that if you got them in, we got 2 audio clips that we'll probably play near towards the end of the show that were sent in.
All of those will probably be on the post show,
Post-production.
yeah, so we get a chance to put them in. Yeah, but we do appreciate everyone sending those clips in. In fact, you still have some time if you want to send something in, either a message through Discord or audio, since this episode will be coming out next week, so still time.
And Deathblow for live spamming bits in there while he's on the
It's a
show.
celebration. It's a celebration. You guys are 200 episodes old.
All right. So if we get back to this, I want to look through kind of when we started getting understood that this meta was not really going away anytime soon. We had these feelings of like, okay, this is too long and the updates are too short, or the updates that do come are not enough, or not enough power level changes enough for people to kind of move off of even their perception, let alone like reality. Then we had this brief stage kind of in between dive and what we call moth meta, where Mercy was just taking over, where McCree had received something to, let's see here. Oh, this is when my double mine came to Junkrat. Junkrat got the double mines around the same time that Mercy got this big rework, where she could turn into the moth, which is the flying machine that she is today. The full 5-man reses were no more. The survivability buffs were slow and steady over the course of time. Winston got his buff to his shield, which was ginormous. Sombra got buffed in a couple ways. I think this buff was probably when they reduced the spread for the first time, and they changed some of the translocator rules for her, and they buffed Diva Matrix. So that's what a lot of the dive stuff was for a while, and that kind of made things oppressive. But towards the end of it, Doom's hitbox for his punches started getting reduced. Diva's rockets got nerfed. Moth Mercy got nerfed or changed, and the ult canceled upon death was also like a big counterplay thing. And we kind of got into the anti-dive bunker for a brief moment. We got double sniper that came out on top of that with Hanzo's rework. Hit scan buffs, and McCree and Fist were a really crazy force for a very short amount of time. And that was one part of the meta that I kind of hoped was going to stick a bit longer, because it was a very interesting play style that we didn't really get a chance to see much of.
I think when all these changes start coming out, we're still seeing mostly a dive dominant meta, but we're start seeing like some glimpses of other stuff that is good, right? I think that around this time, Mercy has gone through like some real changes, like complete rework of the hero. I think for some time people were like, Mercy's not good anymore, but it only took a few weeks for people to start realizing, no, hold on, Mercy's actually busted. Because if you remember around that time when her ultimate got changed, and she spread her wings and could fly up in the air, her movement was just out of this world. She would move incredibly fast, basically unkillable. She would regenerate health super fast too, and she would get this ultimate all the time. So even though her resurrection was no longer what it used to be, it definitely led to like a period of time where Mercy was the go-to healer no matter what you played. It didn't matter if you were playing dive and if you're experimenting with other stuff. You could play Reinhardt with her, no problem. She could keep everyone alive.
During this meta, I wanted to highlight something that was really interesting. Was this is about the end of, let's see here, where is Overwatch League? There it is. This is about the time that Overwatch League Season 1 kicked off. So if you want to see this kind of like iterated on from every stretch, that's when it started. And in Overwatch League, you saw the coolness that was this meta, because there was teams like New York that were somehow figured it out prior to everyone, every kind of tier all the way down the line.
New York was probably the best example of this meta, yeah.
And they did something very unique that no one else was able to do, which was set up a Mercy with a Zenyatta and dunk on nerds. Like, it was crazy to watch how they were pretty much building the whole team around a scouting setup and a damage boost with a Discord orb on the Zenyatta and callouts, and then people were able to follow up and just delete targets. Was incredibly coordinated to watch high level play when they did it. And then you're watching these other teams who are trying to do different things, like the Mercy staying on the Widowmakers, or the Mercy was staying on the Hanzos, or even doing the more hit scan or like Genji buffs with Moth. People were trying all kinds of different things to see if what Nixel was doing was just the best, or if they were trying to iterate and do something unique that would just counter it by using the same heroes that were strong.
Yeah, this was also the time when Orisa really first started seeing play, because you're absolutely right. Nixel was like the dive specialist. They were doing it at a level and at a fluidity and strategic level that nobody else was able to come anywhere near. And the second place team in the standings, I'll never forget this because we've never been back there, was the Houston Outlaws, and it was because they were playing a very specifically anti-dive style where they had Muma and the Orisa. They were playing a lot of Junkrat with the double mine and Jake.
Jake's golden times, dude.
Yeah, absolutely. The things that man would do on Horizon Lunar Colony defense must still give players from Season 1 nightmares, to be perfectly honest. And there was also trying to think. It was just like Linkser on Widowmaker, and that was in large part because Overwatch League was played on LAN, and that was some of the first consistent long-term LAN play that we had. And when you're in that environment with no latency and one headshot kills squishies, and you have people with
it was the way to kill Zenyatta at that time too, right? Yeah. When he was getting pocketed by Mercy all the time, you got
the only way to deal with him.
Yeah, no mobility whatsoever. And you combine that LAN and tick rate and the just absurd flick and accuracy and just mechanical skill of some of the best Widowmakers that the league had to offer. You just had something that was really difficult to combat, and it really took a level of play like New York had to be able to consistently beat that. It's also worth noting you could get like 450 HP on Jonak on Zen at that time, or something like that. It's just stack armor and shields and all that stuff.
Jonak around this time basically made it so that every single team had a Zenyatta, and they all started invested resources into that Zenyatta. It was no longer like, oh yeah, it's just the off support player. It was like, no. This is one of the key roles. And I remember a lot of people in the league sort of like aspiring to kind of like take down the Jonak. Yeah.
not just take him down, they wanted to be him. Everybody was trying to play that same style of
Yep.
Zen and do the same things that Jonak was doing. And as a result, every Zenyatta in Overwatch League got worse. They were figuring it out, and it's the way it goes when you completely change. If you're in Major League Baseball, you can be phenomenal at the game, but if you change your grip on the bat, you're not going to be able to hit anything for a while, right? So it was just a very weird time because they were so dominant, and he was so very clearly the reason why.
It was very apparent, like, yeah, he was on another level, and
Yeah.
everyone was trying to get on that level.
And just as an important note on two folds here, the first is that this is the first time in Overwatch history that Lucio has not been in jail for necessity play. Like the very first meta ever, that Lucio was not being played regularly at like a 90 or 80 percentile pick rate.
It's true.
For team comps.
Mercy,
And these
Mercy
teams
had
in
taken
Overwatch
over so
Season
hard.
1 had development setups on all of their coaching staffs, on all of their scouts to pick up a Lucio player. And almost all of them were either to the point that they had to learn the Zenyatta or sit the bench was their contract, essentially, for Moth Meta. Was incredible because you were seeing these teams that were just completely crippled based off of what players they had signed and sprawling to trying to get other players. And the second was that not only were people trying to be Jonak and trying to fundamentally grip the bat in a new way, like Deathblow aptly put, but the Zenyatta play from Nixel, because they had already set up that way, that team essentially looked at every time they had patch notes and they said, how can we make Zenyatta broken in this context? And they did it. And they ripped teams in half. It was not even a challenge for them. The way they effortlessly picked apart teams. They could spend more resources in scouting. They could spend more resources in saying, okay, we're just going to pick Zenyatta. And then what happens? What do we do then? Like, how do we make this better? And even when we moved into the GOATS meta, which was next when Brigitte was introduced into the game, they were still running Zen. And they refused to not run it. It was incredible.
I think that, again, when Brigitte was introduced into the game, people didn't know exactly what to do with her, right? Like,
Right.
she came in to counter Tracer and to counter Genjis. And I think that when she came in, we started seeing some changes, especially in the pro meta. I think that Orisa started coming more into the picture. I think that double sniper started becoming more of a thing, because now you didn't have to just rely on your supports doing like all the job, right? Like they could keep themselves alive, and bunker was kind of like becoming a thing. I remember around this time, Soul being pretty dominant as well, because they had a Fleta and what was the other guy that was playing with them at the time? They had a really solid double sniper comp that kind of like was starting to pick up traction around those times. But for the most part,
I
I
think
think
probably mostly Fleta.
yeah, it was Fleta and somebody else that was playing with him at the time. It was the initial Soul when they were still pretty good.
That's well.
Definitely crazy. And speaking of the Jonak thing, I remember that was responsible for a good amount of Sombra play, I think, at the time. Just because no matter what you do to buff Jonak, if you EMP him, he goes down to 25 HP, and that was your one opportunity to like take him out.
And even then, it was super hard because he would like.
And Mercy was so good.
Yeah, he would use
Mercy
his ultimate right before the EMP. A couple times he did that. Yeah, and Mercy could keep him alive too. So it was a risky operation. Definitely not just like a straight up counter.
For sure.
Soft counter at best. And Mercy was a good part of the reason why it wasn't a hard counter, I'm pretty sure. It's funny, you still see that interaction all the time. The Sombra is trying to make sure they get either the Lucio or the Zenyatta in the EMP, so that way there is no sound barrier afterwards, or you're waiting for the sound barrier so that you're removing those that buff when you cast your EMP. And it's some of my favorite plays I think two of my favorite plays that you can see at the ridiculous like esports reaction time level that only the pros can give you is EMPs being countered by other EMPs. So you get hacked mid animation on your EMP and you lose the alt charge, but your EMP doesn't go off. And the lightning fast reaction of the Zenyatta mashing Q as soon as you hear any bit of the Sombra coming out of stealth to hit it. So just that like instant EMP. No, he got it. Like it's just some of the fastest paced, crazy instances that you can see, and I think that at its core is really fundamental to what makes Overwatch very fun to me to watch as an esport. Is that counterplay that's not. Listen, I don't. Yes, Sombra's a counter to Zenyatta, but what if I'm just better than you? And I just get the hit cue anyways, right? Because there's that audio cue that most people can't hear, but I hear it in my sleep, and I'm so in tune to waiting for that sound because that's the moment I have to hit cue, or I die and my team loses and we're out of the playoffs and it's over. So yeah, that to me was really kind of where this started. And I think that's of all the things from back then, season 1 of Overwatch League that are still with us and still impacting things. I think that interaction there was really born, and now it's maybe a little bit less of a thing because the Zenyatas are more trained to those audio cues and they're a little more used to the interaction, so they're a little better at getting it off. But man, back then especially, it was like,
oh, definitely, it was teaching
counter
everyone.
the EMP by just hitting Q forehead. I remember pretending like I did it on purpose a couple times in ranked because I just wanted to hit Q and the EMP came in a half second afterwards. And I'm
just me being Jonak, I learned this watching
Overwatch
League.
They had the other thing with this era for. I remember this because they had to change some things for when Sombra popped out of stealth. There was some sort of like time period that they extended between when she appeared out of stealth and when she could do something. And that was a very big thing for the meta. But that change didn't happen for such a long time that she was so quick on the draw to just pop out of stealth even early. And then because what you would do would be she would throw her translocator, end stealth, and then teleport and EMP immediately. And then they started adding these little cooldown timers between when you pop out of stealth, when you pop out of the translocator, and then they did this perma stealth thing that we have now where you're always in stealth and the translocator is permanent until destroyed. And then they were like, why, how can you do this? And then they added all these other little features, and you couldn't get ult charge off of farming health packs anymore. That was a big one. I remember that's why people chose it in particular before 222 was locked. On was it Volskaya, right? It was the defense offense strat. They would just like a race to see how many health packs you could maintain.
Yeah, there was a good amount of time where both
Anubis
offense and defense ran it. Yeah,
Anubis. Yep.
It was all 2 CPs. I'm pretty sure. The one that maybe didn't was like Hanamura. But.
Yeah, I think that was a good one.
Here's the one thing about this era too, and like something that nobody really saw coming, as everyone is looking at Overwatch League and all these amazing plays that are happening. Double sniper, Jonak just taking it by storm. Dive is still being fairly dominant, and Winston still being kind of like the go-to tank in the Overwatch League, with Ryan coming in a few places, or Risa showing up here and there. But as all this is happening, there is this one team in open division kind of like doing their own thing, just messing around, and they're playing Overwatch very differently than everyone else. They're like, you know what? We don't need DPS. You guys gave us no hero limits, and now that we have Brigitte, I think that we can just run a bunch of healers and a bunch of tanks and mess around.
Hey, you remember triple tank? Let's do that again.
Yeah, and nobody took him too seriously until they end up winning open division, and then they go on to face
handily.
And then they go on to face the strongest team in contenders, and
clean house.
And clean house. Yeah, they win the entire tournament, right?
Sure, because Overwatch League was active at the time, so that's what my attention was.
Yeah, I wasn't paying too much attention, but I just remember them winning basically everything with this strategy, and it kind of like becoming kind of like a meme strategy. Like, oh yeah, goats, like you can do triple tank, triple support. I remember a lot of people started trying it out, and next thing we know, goats is just everywhere,
Everywhere.
everywhere.
Yeah, so I know the timing of that very specifically was Brig became legal in stage 4 of season 1, right? And nobody did anything with it. And in large part because the Overwatch League schedule, especially in season 1, was so breakneck fast paced. I mean, everybody
Mhm.
was playing so many games. They didn't have time to innovate. Somebody in contenders has this brand new strategy. Well, if we stop to try to learn it, we're going to lose 7 matches. We're out of it. We're like eliminated from the stage handily, and our end of season playoff standing is in jeopardy. So nobody was really willing to do it. And the one exception and the one team willing to really throw in the brig and mess with it a little bit was Dallas. They put Mickey on it. It's the benefits of being that bad that you weren't going to make the playoffs no matter what you played. So you might as well play the new
Trying to be ahead
hero
of the curve for the
and
next time.
be what people
Right.
at least want to watch. It made him very big fan favorites at the time. I mean, you field Mickey here already a fan favorite, rightfully so. But so that was really kind of where the mainstream got their first look at anything goats esque. And man, when you consider how stupidly broken launch brig was, and the fact that they weren't playing it right, it was crazy. They saw that immediate success. I remember talking about it like, I mean, if Dallas from their 14th spot in the standings is able to just throw this new hero in and see success with it, what are the good teams doing? Why aren't they doing this? And then you make it through the season, the playoffs come, and you saw it a little bit more because there was a break after stage 4 where they were able to try to incorporate it. But the game changed so much going into that point. It really wasn't goats yet in the playoffs. It was starting to be, but it was very pulled pork or halt hook oriented. You That's where you really saw the first tier 1 iteration of, I think, Hog and Orisa together.
Mm.
But you had like, it was your flex support playing the Roadhog, right? So you still had your traditional diva on the
Raucous was
field,
on
and
Hog. I remember
yeah,
that.
Raucous on Jonak on Hog. I know a lot of people credit that with why New York didn't win season 1, because the playoffs
Yeah.
Yeah.
come and all of a sudden the Zen God is playing Roadhog, and what are we supposed to do with this?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it was definitely a very transformative time. And I want to, and this is the third time I've wanted to say it, but like, thank God the perception, even from the smartest, best players in the world, is so far off with some of these heroes and the way balancing works. That's why I always kind of laugh when you see people like go off on tangents on Twitter, and it's easy to think recently of the Moira patch that we're probably not going to talk about too much, but as one, that's maybe a bad example because that's probably just absolutely ridiculous. But like, no, it's just nobody knows the number of times like McCree would get nerfed in the early days, and people are like, "Oh, it got nerfed. We can't play this anymore." And like 3 weeks later, somebody in Europe plays it and they win a whole tournament. And you know what I mean? And other people are like, "Oh, wait, is McCree still good? Were we just wrong?" And like, so there's so many overreactions. There's so many misinterpretations, and it's so intricate, especially a hero like Brig. The impact armor had on every gun, every ability, every damage source in Overwatch was crazy, to the point where I still have no earthly idea how it works. I really just don't. I just know it's good. So I pick Brig and I rally and I try to group my team up and I just go, "Oh, the armor's really good, so we're probably gonna win." And that's crazy. And this is really where we started to see that, right? Because that's when Brig came in and a couple people started using it, and then we got that Overwatch League off season, and all those teams had that time to absorb and watch and study and practice the new the new Overwatch is essentially
Mm.
what GOATS was before season 2, and then yeah, I'm sure we're about to talk about it. We just
And
went
and the
full
thing
blown
you're,
GOATS.
I think you're right. The thing is, when GOAT started, everyone thought it was a fad, right? Like, oh, this is just a cheese comp. Obviously, if you go into like Overwatch League, people would know how to counter this. I remember when like GOATS was first starting to pick up steam. A lot of people would say like, a good dive comp would eat this alive because they don't have the mobility, they don't have long range damage, and curiously enough, goats just kept getting stronger and stronger because the original team, the original goats, named after after them, um, they had reinvented the playstyle quite a bit. They were playing Overwatch much differently than a lot of the other teams, and they
Mhm.
were forcing those other teams to sort of fight them in their own grounds, right? They were not, even though the composition lacked a lot of range damage and a lot of things that you would think like, no, but you need this stuff for a good comp, they would make it up with their style, right? Like the way that they would move, they would keep each other alive, rotate their cooldowns, the positions that they would hold, and when they would choose to engage as well, was pretty creative. And it was just the beginning. They were just scratching the surface when this started becoming
It was
a
back when you
thing.
could stun through barriers. Like the Reinhardt stuns would basically, you'd run the Reinhardt and the
We don't
Brig.
we don't talk about those times.
Oh man,
As a
this is
Reinhardt
this
player
is like
by
the
that
beginning
time,
of PTSD for a lot of
And
main tank players.
so,
Okay,
and here's the other thing. Around that time, they were just starting to scratch the surface, which what possible with this composition. But as people started becoming better and better with it, Blizzard started realizing like, oh God, this is way
this
too
is
strong.
degenerate.
This is way too strong. And Overwatch League teams realized that too, to the point where every single team in the Overwatch League was running GOATs and trying to become the GOATs team. Obviously, some teams succeeded better than others, but I don't think I've ever seen a sequence of buffs and nerfs that were targeted specifically to counter this composition and to maybe give a way for players to play something else around it. But it was almost like as these buffs and nerfs would come out, the level of goats would just keep increasing and increasing, and they would just keep finding ways to be able
Teams were
to just
adapting
keep.
so fast.
Yeah, and then like you would have goats in maps that had a ton of verticality, like places where like this composition should not be good at all. People were pulling it off.
yeah,
I
and
think
they
it
would
was just like these tiny tweaks they were making with single hero flips, right? We had
Yep.
we saw the Sombra, we saw McCree thrown in there, we saw the Anna Moira variation swapping quite a bit.
There was a May variant of it.
Mm-hmm.
You'd pick the Zen over which hero did you replace? I don't remember exactly. Maybe the Anna. Was Anna in the
Yeah,
original
it was
iteration?
Anna, Zen, or
Yeah.
Moira. It was kind of like
So
one of
you-
those three.
Eventually became like Brigitte, Zen, Lucio.
And
Yep.
that was
Something-
that was because it was Goat's mirrors all the time, and
Yeah.
Mhm.
Discord Orb was so good at allowing you to be able to take down the tank.
Something.
This was really the era of Overwatch where I think power creep got out of Blizzard's hands. They really lost control of balance at this time. And yeah, you started to allude to it. They specifically targeted this play style, this composition so much in their balance patches that I think it really took them a while to get the game back to a healthy state, because they'd make these changes. Looking at you, Orisa, you're still here. Where they boosted her to like, okay, let's let the bunker style be what beats goats. So they boosted all these heroes, and one of the patches we talked about it, like, okay, they're taking the nuclear option, right? They're just buffing everything. They're nerfing the heroes in the composition. Like it's gone. It's dead. This was the end of stage 3 season 2. It didn't work. It was still there. It was still
it was impossible.
it just didn't go anywhere.
And like
So
you're
then
saying, they were
Yeah.
over buffing some of the other heroes to
Yeah.
compensate for this. Yeah.
And they didn't fix those failed experiments in balance. They just kept balancing different things and new things, like let's add to it.
Yeah.
And then skipping a page, but we get to Rollock, we get to 222, it's dead, it's over, kind of. The play style persisted, but you get my point. And then now we're here with all these heroes, with all these drastic changes to them, designed to be so oppressive that they take down goats and force some variation into the metagame. And now they're broken, right? They just, the way they fit into this new world where two damage players have to be chosen just makes it so difficult to not run them. And I think we're still feeling the effects of that literally to this day as we look at, I don't play a ton of Overwatch anymore. Like, I've got my fill of Orisa as a main tank player. I'm good. If somebody needs an off tank and I can lock Sigma all day, sure, I'll log in. But like, so we're still feeling the effects of that, and we're still dealing with some of those characters that were adjusted to try to take down goats and now are just mainstays in the game because of the state they were left in.
I think you're right. I think we can definitely still feel some of the ripples that and like consequences that sort of came out of the goats meta. I think to be fair, towards the end of the goats meta, so many changes had come out to the game that some teams actually did started figuring out how to counter it, and we did get some instances where Sombra became a thing. Shanghai Dragons actually showed us a couple times like how to deal with goats without playing goats. But this was really towards the end, and at that point, rumors about Roadlock were becoming a thing because Blizzard realized that this wasn't an offshoot, right? The fact that they had introduced a couple of new heroes, and like you said, it had caused a cumulative power creep, right? It was the fact that now you had enough shields, enough healing over time, and in an area that it didn't matter if you threw a bunch of nerfs into it. It was just too good. And at this point, they realized we need to institute some limits, or we're just going to have a nightmare of a balancing task in front of us from here on out, right? Every hero that we add, we're going to have to think about what's going to be the rippling consequences of with the other 30 heroes in the roster. That's just exhausting. Roadlock is needed. They finally gave in and put it in, and almost immediately the heroes that had been overtuned became meta, right? It was almost like the next day Orisa was a tank to go to. Bunker was incredibly powerful, and double shield, now that Sigma was out, sort of immediately became the thing. I think right before that was maybe like May, but also running Orisa.
The one thing about that I wanted to kind of bring up with the transition into 222 was that all of the buffs and nerfs were geared towards increasing potency for DPS characters and reducing healing from healing characters so that people would be demotivated to play more healers and tanks together, and increasing the amount of damage output that the damage dealers could do. And by virtue of that, they've also reworked a bunch of heroes over the course of time, right? We had a couple adjustments on Reaper. We had a couple adjustments on Doomfist. Again, we had somewhere around here, Hanzo got a buff with his Storm Arrows, I believe, and to help deal with the barriers when the barriers started coming out in Double Shield. And it was like they didn't understand that the problem was a joint thing that we have now realized in retrospect was armor. Healing was too easy to come by and too potent. And third, barriers were way too overhauled to be in this giant context of ways to work around them with CCs or positioning or different mobility options that you could get to your team to get around the barriers. Barrier busting wasn't really a main focus of a lot of comps because they didn't ever really had to deal with multiple ones before. And now with Sigma and Orisa here, now we have 2 tanks that you could be running, or 3 if you didn't have roll lock, that you would just have this wall that you could never get through. And so what they started doing over time in this meta was to reduce the total shielding that you could do, increasing the kind of the baseline for shields of all of the tanks that had a shield where their starting point was because they buffed Winston's. And then they increased the amount of damage that you could penetrate for armor. Armor itself got a nerf where it doesn't fundamentally work the way it used to do, where it was half or the X. It's now half or significantly less per pellet that you would deal damage with. So tank busters got stronger. They reworked a little bit with more focused fire with Bastion. Bastion got a little bit more of a busting niche role. Still not like incredibly potent for dealing with the damage threat, but I don't know. To me, it still feels like now that we're kind of going outside of the hero pools, because that was what was on the horizon after this, was the introduction of Echo, and that she could bust barriers if she needed to, as well as just a return to double barrier now that hero pools are kind of gone from some of the play is still interesting to me. I'm like, I don't really understand what the solution could be to that sort of problem, but I don't know. I think the solution could just be mobility.
I think somebody really, Sureforce specifically, really eloquently broke down this topic, and he put it all under the umbrella of effective HP. And go to his Twitter account and check it out. It was very openly discussed in the community amongst Owl Pros and content creators and things like that. If you didn't read it, I think you really should. It gives you kind of an inside look at really what the problem is and why it's so difficult to be on those mechanically skill-based heroes. And it's funny too, to kind of half rewind us a little bit, but it does fall under the category. Buried under all these changes, there was a hero released called Ash. And nobody played Ash forever, I want to say, after release. It took so long. And it literally took hero pools coming out and forcing McCree and Widowmaker to be banned at the exact same time, like 3 different times in Overwatch League, to like force these teams. No. You don't have a choice. You have to play Ash. And then now they start messing with it and they go, oh, like, wait a minute, this is actually nuts. Like what I'm able to do when I get value off the dynamite. And, and they really started to intricately understand how the hero works. And it really now has pushed Ash to the forefront of the meta. When you think of hit scans, it's usually Ash over McCree now. She's almost as good as Widowmaker in the long range too, especially with a Mercy in her pocket, and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, if we're moving into that role lock conversation, or I'm sorry, hero pool conversation, that's one that really comes to mind. Is Ash kind of got born out of hero pools, and just the necessity of having to play it really pushed people to experiment with it and start to fully understand what's going on under the hood with that hero and what makes her so individually valuable, that in a way that nobody else can really emulate, because all hit scans are just point and click characters, right guys?
Yeah. And I think at this point, we're at the present. So at this point, here we are all experiencing the game. Hero pools that have definitely shaken things up. I think that, being removed from the lower echelon of competitive definitely has kind of like reverted things back to like how they were. But having hero pools at the highest level of play definitely gives us some more guidance into how to play different heroes. And to me, Overwatch today feels so different as Overwatch before, right? It's almost like pre-goats and after goats. There's a distinct change in the flavor of Overwatch. And for the people who have been playing this game for a very long time, you probably know what I'm talking about. You probably feel that. For the people that have come in since goats was around, you're probably more used to the game in a different way. And I'm not trying to say one is better than the other one. I have enjoyed the game in all of its states. Now there's some cool stuff about it as well. And I think that hero pools have brought a different flavor to it. I don't know if you guys want to add here anything about hero pools, but in general, the meta right now seems the most fluid that it's ever been, at least in the sense that because of them, it just doesn't feel like it gets stale. And it's hard to pinpoint just like, okay, this is the one thing that you have to always be doing, because at the end of the day, the people who are playing at the top level have so much variety. What do you think here?
I think for hero pools in particular, I think it had kind of a multifaceted pros and cons list that really showcased itself in that brief time that we had them. And the main thing was like, what's a part of the conversation? Are we talking about hero pools for like the competitive circuit, like watching professional play, or tier 3, tier 2 Overwatch, tier 1 Overwatch, that type of thing? And that schedule and how teams are preparing and how teams are scouting and how they're playing the meta and preparing and doing their own thing? Or are we talking about competitive with regards to what we're doing in our spare time, like the differences between bronze, silver, gold, plat, diamond, masters, all the way up to GM, because that hero pool looks completely different with its pros and cons set of lists as well. And for me, I think that for the time when they said that the hero pools was going to apply to upper level echelons of play, I think it was masters and GM only, and then they were going to remove map pools altogether, was probably the best decision, I think, for that iteration. Because it does keep the variety up. It forces players to kind of adapt. There's no promotion for locking in a single hero and being able to just go all the way up to the top level and only ever play that. And mastery there. And then at the lower echelon allows competitive play for us plebs that are below masters, the ability to really get to understand and get to know those heroes and practice them over and over and over and over again when we're not really playing the game relatively enough to kind of get to that level of mastery, right? So I think it was really good for us to have the ability to play our Hanzo if that's what we want to play, or whatever tank. And then you go to the Overwatch League thing, and in some stretches I thought it was good because it allowed teams to just say, look, this is what we're comfortable playing. Let's play that. And there's not a whole lot of other things that they could do. They couldn't really do a whole lot of preparation. They couldn't really scout teams as well. They were just practicing, getting good at what they had, given the certain context that they were in. But the drawback was there was a lot less of the cool iterations of what you would see in kind of traditional sports, where you could scout teams, you could look at their styles of play, you could observe things. You wouldn't have these weird pick in the jar. You're like, well, I think they're not going to really iterate much and they're going to stick with this, or I think they're going to go blow a gasket and do something completely different. It was really hard to predict, but before hero pools were in place, teams were scouting, they're iterating on metas, they're mastering what's good at the time during the current patch. I did like that style. So it's kind of that pros and cons for the pro circuit, but I think in the competitive thing, I think hero pools at that iteration was the best way that they could roll it out, personally.
So we're doing an hour starting right now, we said, right? Because
yeah, this is the show.
Hero pools. I have a very different relationship with hero pools than a lot of the community does, and I'll die on this hill. It's completely fine with me. I love them. I want them back. Give them to me. Anybody who disagrees, I think you're just wrong. I'm sorry. It's just they reinvigorated Overwatch for me in a way that only launching the game did, right? I got as close to that feeling and that love of logging in and playing Overwatch when I had a new hero pool to adapt and figure out, and I had, it made the games, you had them for a week, right? So like what you thought was going to be good on day one and what found some immediate success, there'd be a counter for it by day 3. You'd need to adjust, you'd need to figure stuff out, and then it was just always fresh. And really outside of a couple instances, and I really blame Blizzard's decision making within what the actual balancing or which heroes were banned and why people didn't like it so much. There were a couple really bad hero pools, and it was when they broke the mold and they said, we're not going to ban 1 tank, 2 DPS, and 1 support. We're going to ban Ana and Moira at the same time, and now nobody has a main healer and nobody is enjoying themselves. The supports were miserable, the tanks were miserable, the DPS were probably fine with it because they were just running around on high, you know what I mean, like their widows, their Genjis, whatever they wanted to play, and their burst damage heroes, and taking people out. In Overwatch League, like Rob said, it forced teams to develop a style. This is what we're good at. This is what we're comfortable with. This is what we're going to fall to. It reset things so often that going into each week, it created parity. That's a phenomenal thing in sports. Sports leagues strive for parity. Overwatch League had it, is always had it in spades. First of all, I don't want to mean that it's parity doesn't exist. I just almost watched the Gladiators beat Philly on my monitor over here. There's plenty of parity even now with, but there's also a hero pool in place, so go figure. Um, but it forced people to do that, and it really forced teams to adapt and learn and figure it out. You'd come into a week, you'd have a take on the meta game. Oh no, at the end of map 2, like, we were wrong, we've got to adapt, we've got to figure it out. I remember specifically going into one of the early season matchups. It was Houston versus Paris, and Houston was abysmal early on, right? They just looked terrible with their new coach, a couple new players, like things where they all had the flu for 2 weeks at the start of the season. Like, it was just as bad as it can be. And I remember looking at the hero pool. It was the first ever hero pool, and I did a YouTube video about it. And I'm just like, I've solved the meta. I know it's going to be. Not only that, I'm guaranteeing you that the Houston Outlaws are going to beat the Paris Eternal. And everybody's like, you're crazy, that's nuts. And it's exactly what happened. And it was because, it was just, it forced a change in things that made it different enough to where the hero pools of the players just didn't line up. And it kind of gave me, as an analyst, some extra ability to go in and tinker and figure things out. And I might specifically remember it because my team won and I picked my team in the upset, but it was just like, it was so much based off of Paris's win rates and stats on specific heroes and what we thought the meta was going to be. Specifically, it was going to be our first Winston meta in a year and a half or something like that, right? So I went back and looked at all the Winston numbers, and the worst performing player on Houston was Muma at main tank, but his best hero was Winston. And one of the big surprise performances on Paris was their main tank on Reinhardt, but he had terrible stats on Winston. So it was like I was able to connect these dots and draw these lines in a way that without hero pools, you don't really get to do, because you get stuck in the rut and it just becomes, you need somebody to just be having an off day to really get that parity. And Overwatch is so dynamic and intricate, the team play and the coordination, that you get that plenty. But yeah, like I said, I could go on and on about hero pools, but it to me was my second favorite time in the entirety of the game, playing, watching everything. And I'm still a little gutted that it got ripped away as fast as it did. And I just really, really want it back so badly. I can't play Orisa anymore. Blizzard, please help. Send help.
Honest, what do you think about hero pools, man?
I think that hero
From a
pools
retrospective.
have like its ups and downs, just like you guys have explained. I think that I personally can see the cons of it, especially at the lower ranks where people are not thinking about meta as much, and the meta is not as defined as much to like where you're forced to play it as much. But I definitely see how in Overwatch League it's created a new environment where it's pretty exciting to watch. And I think that it's taken some time for the teams to adapt to this sort of thing. I think that the workflows that they had before revolved around studying a meta and analyzing a ton of VODs and practicing set plays for a very long time, which is no longer possible with a fast, rapid change of pace. So I think a lot of the teams have had to adapt, especially coaches, to kind of like this new normal. And like you said, Deathblow sort of defaulted to like their strengths, which I think it's particularly pretty cool that we actually get some more personality, some more of this is what I'm good at playing, and since this is what's available, and I don't know what I'm gonna face, this is what we're gonna go with. So I think there's a little bit more of that coming out, which honestly, it's how you would picture Overwatch being from the beginning, kind of like that ideal Overwatch that they painted the picture when the game first came out, and they were like, "Hey, you can switch whenever you want to. You have no limits here." I think the idea originally was so you wouldn't be pigeonholed, and you could win the game in a variety of ways. Now, that could be an utopia, right? Like balance wise, number wise, and putting that into code and putting that into a game might be something that is really, really hard to achieve. But I think with certain systems, certain things that have been put in place, like hero pools, we've gotten a semblance in pro play of like what that could look like even if we've had to sort of like artificially put it in there, right? It didn't just develop naturally. But I think it's a cool way to have the pro scene. That's my take on them.
Now, as we kind of keep going through here, I wanted to ask about something that I've been meaning to ask at Deathblow about for a long time, which is with these hero pools, how do you think this really makes watching competitive to new viewers or even existing viewers that maybe are not at that level of understanding for the game? How does this like lower the approachability of the game to me? Because I know that like with hero bans for MOBA games, it seems pretty normal at this point, and MOBAs have been around a long time, that kind of translates over to other games, that if they had that kind of mechanic in there. But it does slow the games down, it slows the viewability, but it does also like help with when you're live watching something, the commentators have a little bit more time to kind of build storylines. They have a bit more time to kind of bring you into the match, if you will, kind of set the stage. I don't know if how they would work per se, but I do like the one thing about hero bans that I've been really considering over the course of time to pitch this to you guys has been it puts the variety in the game it puts the players in the driver's seat for that sort of thing. So if something is overtuned or if something is too strong or if a player is too strong, the teams get to decide which one they want to go hit. They want to say, okay, well, we understand that this meta is strong, but their players are maybe not that great at that. So we're going to ban this. Or we're going to force them in a specific way. Now, it does change based off of how many bans you may have or whatever. But like the hero pools has highlighted a couple good things where week to week, certain teams may lose out. And I think that that's not really a big win for fantasy in my estimation, because you can't really like bank on some heroes being like in the game. You can't really bank on, hero releases anyways. But you can't really plan well. I think that the hero bans the hero pools made it really hard for maybe teams to really scout and kind of shotgun approach getting players that they want to work with. I don't know. It's kind of just some extra angles to kind of hit this topic.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the fantasy aspect goes, and I say this as a guy that is absolutely in love with fantasy sports, started a fantasy Overwatch League podcast, and things like that. I love it. Tough. You've got to make the game as healthy and as good as possible, and then adapt your fantasy game to work within the confines of what that game is. So at the end of the day, fantasy will figure it out. And the players will figure it out, right? It'll affect, in this world, especially the DPS role is very dependent on what heroes are in and out, right? If you take, if you draft Linkser, he comes to mind because he was like singularly banned out of being played in multiple weeks, right? When they did that McCree Widow ban weeks where they took them out of the pool, then he just wouldn't be able to be played, and that self-corrects itself because that makes the DPS role as a whole just less valuable, and you just draft them later and you just hold more of them on your bench so that you can swap them out, and you just got to make some educated guesses who's going to get playtime this week and figure it out. So I think that'll solve itself. I love what you said about seeing the variety take center stage in the game with hero pools, and I think bans would work very similarly. My big issue with bans, they'd be probably roughly the same as hero pools, and the impact that they would have for me if there was just 3 more tanks and 3 more supports in the game. I think it could be a really healthy way to go about it. I know some people disagree. It's not really the conversation we're having anyways.
Right.
So I think it's great to bring the variety of the game to the forefront. I think it's great to do things that encourage teams to make roster swaps and decisions like that because so many Overwatch League fans stan like this. The whole standing thing became prevalent in my mind, and I became aware of it when I started tracking Overwatch League. Like, I don't care about the team, I care about the player. And like, to me as an NFL fan, I don't care about the player. I care about what shirt. You know what I mean? Like, if he's wearing my team shirt, then I love him and he's part of my family and I die for him. And as soon as he puts on a New England Patriots or a Miami Dolphins or a rival jersey, you're dead to me. I don't want anything to do with you. Okay.
I'm out.
So I think that's great from that perspective to like, listen, no, it's so much harder to be like locked on the bench right now, right? And so the fans, I think, resonate with that, and it's a little bit good when you make them mad when their guy comes off the bench too, right? Like you want both sides of that coin. You when you can balance the, yes, they're back. I'm so excited. Where did they go? Why aren't they playing them? No, sure for no win, because that's very close to me as a Toronto fan. Both sides of it are really, really super important. And I think balancing that is great. And forcing the game to become less about the super micro interactions makes the casting job easier, as you mentioned. Like, what was Goats? Goats was, people talked about how it was boring and impossible to watch. I don't know. I didn't really get that because personally, I play in the six stack environment. I played on a roster in open division during the GOATS meta. I knew what the interactions were supposed to be. I knew which abilities and cooldowns would trigger further actions, right? Specifically Zarya bubble. When the Zarya cast her bubble on one of her teammates, that was it. They were waiting. As soon as it dropped, the other team was going for it, right? That was their one saving grace to keep their Reinhardt alive. So I was able to get more out of watching something like the GOATS meta than the average viewer, but I was very aware that most people weren't in that situation, right? Like most people were just looking at GOATS and it was six players would just mash into six other players and everybody pressed Q and everybody pressed E and shift and like just used every cooldown. And then at the end of it, sometimes nobody died. Right. That was the reality of the world we were living in GOATS. And it was, I get why it was not great to watch. So I think this really, like you said, it may have brought the level of intricacy in play down, but as a viewer and somebody who's aware of that intricacy, I don't miss it. Like I'm perfectly happy to watch the best Genjis dash around and hit resets and just, I'm speaking specifically about Super because he's the best Genji. But I'm perfectly happy to watch a game that's more about the mechanical pop off and the mechanical skill of individuals, and the teamwork's not gone from Overwatch. It's absolutely still there, and it gets highlighted and brought up because every decision isn't made and informed by three other actions that happened before it, right? So the casters are able to see it. You think of the intricate plays with BAP's amplification window, right? Where he drops that and then the Orissa's halting and the Reinhardt throws the flame strike through the window, and that's now the damage threshold is enough, right? Like so you kind of, it feels to me like you get all of it and you're able to absorb all of it, but maybe you're seeing and witnessing like 80% of it instead of like GOATS is 100% about teamwork and coordination and not so much the mechanical pop off of things. And like I said,
It's not flashy.
Right. I've enjoyed every metagame. And I say that as a spectator, as a player, it's about the length of time. And it became like GOATS just became taxing. So to me, hero pools represented an ability to shift away from that. And there was going to be times in metagames, the postseason, where you lost, where that fell off, and it became more about the intricacies and mastering the specifics of one meta game. When hero pools fell away and everything just became one meta game, nothing's changing, no patches, no anything. Like this is where we're going to decide the champion on. And I don't know, I'm just a little bit bitter that we didn't get to see it flesh out. And a lot of reasons why that is, and honestly the pandemic and quarantine and COVID and all this, that is a big major driving force of why I think there's been so much upheaval and change this season in the league. And we say a lot on the show, there was never going to be a good answer to most of the questions that we had, but it's, to me it was just such a breath of fresh air in every aspect. I can't express how much I loved hero pools enough, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, and to be honest, right now we are in a period of time where like we've never been before. The game has changed so much. Hero pools have kept it moving. We've had so many changes come in so fast, and they're still coming in. Right now we're sort of in a maintenance period in Overwatch where the majority of the change and the assets that we're used to seeing are being postponed, right? Overwatch 2 does seem pretty exciting in that sense, coming in with a new game mode for competitive and Overwatch League, coming in with about 6 new heroes hitting in all at once. That will probably the closest we get to going back to launch, where everything was new, nobody knew kind of like what was good. It'll be at a smaller scale, but it'll be significant enough that there'll be a wide experimentation period and a lot of new compositions and possibilities to sort of come out. So it'll be an exciting time when that happens. And until then, I do expect Overwatch to sort of keep in this iteration mode where heroes like Moira, for example, get looked at. Heroes like Orisa might get looked at. All kind of like the meta offenders are kind of like getting looked at right now, and changes are coming in fast. So who knows in a couple months from now what sort of changes we'll be talking about. But it's been an amazing ride so far. I think that the almost hour and 40-minute conversation we've had about all these changes goes to show, like how interested we've been in it, and like we've been through it thick and thin. We've been part of all of them. I'm sure people in our community that have been following us for a while have too. And I'm just super glad we've gotten to experience it all, because at the end of the day, Overwatch has been an amazing experience for all of us. We've all met some amazing people. We've all grown as gamers and as content creators next to this game. So yeah, it's an awesome journey, and glad that we can all be here together to sort of reminisce and tell it.
Yeah, no matter
Speaking
what
of which,
the future is, like I'm not exaggerating when I say that the people I've met in Overwatch and the other content creators, you two, Bob and Mel, and I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of trying to name everybody, because I will forget some, and they'll get mad at me. But like, you guys are close personal friends of mine, not people I game with. Like, we've hung out, we've met at events, at BlizzCon, at grand finals, and like I am closer to you guys than I am with people that I would have called my best friends in high school, that I would hang out with and on a daily basis, or multiple times a week, and that's something that no other game has really given me. Even like World of Warcraft, and maybe that's in part because I'm a content creator, and so we've interacted and met in a different way. But I didn't meet my WoW guildies. Some of them got together and met up, but that wasn't me. But Overwatch drove me to go to BlizzCon, to go to the grand finals, to go to the big events, to meet with you guys in person and hang out, and meet the fans, and meetups that, like, the turnout, just like shocking how many people show up to those things.
Yeah.
And it's great. We had one guy tweet at us the other day. I got major deja vu, right? Like, I started listening to you guys. The first episode I ever listened to was the first time I mowed the lawn at my new house. We just sold it yesterday, right? So, like, we've lasted longer than that dude owned his home. And things like that, and that relationship absolutely extends to the Discord servers we talked about much earlier in the show, and how close knit and great those communities are, and just our play group as just friends and creators going in, and means the world to me. I cried during our 200th episode because of Bob's question. You know, really has done a lot for me personally, and meeting you guys and becoming friends with you guys, and learning from you as content creators. I mean, when I bought this microphone, it was you guys that were like helping me decide what to get and what to do, and I don't know if that exists in all the other games amongst content creators, but it's been a very special and fun experience to kind of learn and grow as a creator, as a player of the game, and as a person with the two of you, and with some of the other ones. So thank you very much to everybody.
Absolutely.
Big thank you for that, Death Blow. I really appreciate that. I can't say it better than what you've said from the other side, and I don't want to try. But this show has been something that Andres and I kind of sat through, and we're just like, this is something we want to try. This game looks really fun, and I want to make something about something that looks fun. And that's kind of honestly the brainchild about this. It's like we played Hearthstone. It looks fun. This is very different. I have wanted to play something like this for a long time. Let's talk about it a lot. And let's do this as much as we can and for as long as we can. And I went full tilt for a couple weeks, and Andres like took him off guard because I'd made a bunch of assets for this show. I was starting to learn Illustrator at the time. I made all of our branding. I bought some assets and started making stream setups, and then I dumped it in his lap, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, okay, let's do this." and now I can't even think of my daily routine without some of you knuckleheads in our Discord like messing with it. You know what I mean? Like it's just this weird full circle moment that these little iterations of things that we were planning and kind of putting in concept is now just full tilt a well-oiled machine at this point. Like just weird stuff. I also knew that this was a possibility that this show would not continue after a year because I was trying to get a job in Japan, and the fact that we've been doing this for 3 years in the other end of the globe has been nothing short of incredible from my point of view. Knowing my schedule and knowing Andres' schedule on the back end that a lot of you guys don't see has been just nutty sometimes. It's just been an absolute train wreck some weeks and very easy other weeks. But let me just thank a couple other people outside here. We got our diamond sponsors. We always thank Darren G, Cypher, Shazir, Anagram, Shepherd, Tonka Truck, Manyface God, Sung L, Indecent Sarcasm, who I talked to today, and brand new to the team, Robert W, great name by the way, who is on the new Plat squad for our patrons. We really thank you guys, and for anyone that has ever donated any sort of money, bits, has spent less than a month on Patreon anyways, like thank you for your support. Thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for reviewing the show over the course of 4 years. It's been incredible. I'm just going to read a couple things on the Discord for you. These are the text ones, and Andres can choose either before or after the segment. He might play some of the audio on the recording. But coming in from Shazir, says, I've loved the show since very early. I'm happy I've been here, been able to go from a rabid fanboy to actually meeting you in person and getting to know you further. Now I consider both of you friends. Thank you for the knowledge and the joy that you've given me over the years. It's irreplaceable. I've rewritten this 100 times in the last few days. I'm still not happy with it, but I'm out of time. So big thanks to that. We also have one from Chaos Tempest, who has been with us for a very long time in the Discord community. Thank you guys so much for the show and the community you've built. It's been one of the most positive groups I've had the pleasure of being a part of, with everyone always so helpful and supportive. All the best for the next 100 episodes. I think maybe I'm too late. No, you made it. And also we have a audio message from Anagram and from Totem from the wow, my brain is just farting. Totem, help me.
Not your fault. He does like 7 shows.
Yeah, if you would just commit and pick one, then yeah. But he's from Heroes Never Die. That's the main one, the big arm that he does, as well as Overwatch Recall. Those are 2 I can remember off the top of my head. But thank you guys so much. I know we didn't get a whole lot of time to talk through reminiscing about the show itself, but we've done that enough times last, like when we have 50 episode cycles. So 200, we wanted to do something a little bit more fun for us.
Yeah, I think it's been quite some time since the game released, so it was a nice time to sort of like look back and see what has been, right? Especially since right now I think the game has been at a more like slow point, right? Like I think that currently the game is holding on to its core audience, the audience that like really enjoys Overwatch, and the audience that has grown with the game. And like we've all said, we're all kind of like waiting for Overwatch 2 and what's to come. Hopefully we get some news about that soon. But like you guys said, this community has brought so many cool stuff, and like we've built like such an awesome network of friends and rivals and mentors and whatever you might call it. It's been amazing, and it's holding us all together. Even if, you know, life sometimes gets busy, COVID attacks, pandemics are out in the loose, riots happen, and maybe our attention has to be put somewhere else. Like you all said, there's always, I think, that that friendship bond and this awesome community kind of like holding us together that I always feel like I can come back to when I open up Discord. I know that you guys are gonna be there, and if I need like some friends to play a game or stuff like that, I can always like come there, and it's where like the community will be. So it's an amazing feeling to be able to have that, and especially during the pandemic, it's definitely helped a lot keep my sanity. I joke with my wife that we've been preparing our whole lives for this moment because we already had all the systems in place to live at home and have a social life, no problem.
Same joke all the time with my family. They're like, "How are you doing? Are you okay sitting home?" I'm like, "Have we met before?" I don't. Just
Do you know how many times I've actively avoided you to do this exact thing?
back off my windows, and it's a regular weekend for me. Like, I don't care.
All right, folks. I think it's time to close this before we hit the 2-hour mark. So I'm gonna sign us off here. You can find me at Not Rob and Not Rob May on Twitch and Not Rob on Twitter and Instagram. You can find Andres at IPLAI Games on Twitch and Twitter with the tag there. His Twitch, just add the TV at the end. Deathblow, you can find him at Deathblow TTV on Twitter and Twitch. You can also find their SoundCloud in the link in the description. Just search High Noon Podcast. You will find it. It is not hard to find. If you're looking for more of the sister show to Omnic Lab, that's still cooking, talking about competitive Overwatch, talking about Overwatch League ins and outs. You can go hang out with him and Deathblow and Blevins at any time there. We will be sure to schedule to get Blevins and Deathblow back for our annual Halloween tradition, which is a great habit that we've gotten into. I'm looking forward to that, especially if we have more Overwatch 2 news by then. Hashtag bless, please. But yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in to episode 200. It has been absolutely phenomenal. And remember, one more time, don't be a lab rat, be a scientist. We'll see you for 201 for another 100. See ya.
Thanks, everybody. Everybody came to the chat. Love you guys. You want to sign us off with some Zenyatta, Robbie Robson?
Yeah, let me see if I got it. There we go. Forgot to hit the button. Sorry, guys.
I have nothing more to teach you. The rest you must learn for yourself. Walk in harmony, my student.
I need that Zen outro. Thank you, Anna.
The show's not complete without it. Bye, everyone.
Bye.